Nothing, sir. You don't have to do anything. It's all good. You just have to. I'll just introduce you, and you can start off correspondingly.
Sure, sure.
Just give us 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll begin. We'll begin right now. A very good morning to one and all present here. I welcome you all to the 12th edition of Amalthea. Amalthea is the annual technical summit of IIT Gandhinagar. It is India's first student-run technical summit and is the largest technical summit of Gujarat. Amalthea's theme this year is unifying minds and fostering ingenuity. I am Gautam Vashisht, and I'm pleased to be the host for today's wonderful webinar. Today's event is sponsored by JSW as our title sponsor, Hindalco, our associate sponsor, and Gujarat Maritime Board for their invaluable support. I would like to thank our sponsors for supporting us to bring into actuality the idea and vision of Amalthea. Amalthea aims to provide a platform and inspire young minds to ponder upon existing problems and find innovative solutions. Today, we are very grateful to have with us Mr. J.D. Patil, someone who has always strived to find unique solutions to real world problems. Mr. J.D. Patil is a whole-time director and senior executive vice president for L&T's defense business and new age smart technology businesses. He is an alumnus of IIT Mumbai, pursuing his MTech in mechanical engineering. He has a rich, more than 4-decade-long career in L&T and has been an instrumental part in growing the nascent technology and production development group of L&T's corporate R&D with a focus of top-end interdisciplinary product development. Mr. Patil spearheaded the company's foray in the defense sector since the inception of this segment in L&T. He led the development efforts for realization of weapon delivery systems for DRDO and for the Indian Navy. Over the years, under his leadership, L&T has built a portfolio of indigenous in-house products, systems, technologies, and platforms both built on its own and by teaming up with DRDO and the Indian Armed Forces, and is today engaged with the design to delivery of solutions across its chosen defense segments. Mr. Patil heads the defense business at L&T with a focus on naval platforms. He oversees dedicated defense production centers at Talegaon, Coimbatore, Visakhapatnam, and Kuttapalli, besides specific dedicated centers at L&T, Powai, and Hazira complexes. He is also the president of the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers and was the founder vice president of SIDM. He has been conferred an honorary fellowship by Indian National Academy of Engineering and the Project Management Associates, and has been honored by IIT Bombay with the prestigious Distinguished Alumnus Award in the Diamond Jubilees year of the Institute. Dear sir, we are very grateful that you could take some time out of your extremely busy schedule to address us and our young audience today. And we're all looking forward to hearing from what you have to say. Members of the audience, please note that we would all be having a Q&A session after the keynote by Mr. Patil. The stage is all yours, sir.
Thank you, Gautam. And let me begin by saying that um, I just heard about this Amalthea a couple of weeks back when I was contacted, and it suddenly dawned on me that it's going to be the 12th year of Amalthea. So it's not something which is one of those brainwaves that suddenly came along and you decided to have an event. It's also good to see that the young minds start looking at innovation. For all of us at Larsen Toubro, and since this is a unique organization which essentially does not have any owner, it's owned by 11 lakh Indian people. And of course, the government of India and the company employees own the most of this organization. So between the government and employees, we own about 40% of Larsen Toubro. About 20% is owned by the finance institutions. And of course, the balance, about 40%, is, as I said, the 11 lakh employees. So in Larsen Toubro, when we started recruiting, our people, and that started right in the 1939 and 40s, because after the company was founded, there was a world war that came in 15 months. And to do anything that we could think of to realize into complete plants and systems started what Prime Minister Modi today calls as Make in India. For us, the Atmanirbhar or the Make in India began in 1939 as the World War came in. So this is one aspect of us as an organization and a continued leadership, wherein you can't find any senior employees' children who are sitting in the helm at this organization's top leadership. And this is exactly where we enormously attach a huge value to the innovation. And today at L&T, we genuinely look at if anybody else in the world could do it, we certainly would have done it. But there's anybody else who can't do things at L&T, we possibly can attempt and achieve some of those kind of industrial plants and scale and infrastructure, and of course, the nuclear defense and space sectors. Of my career, about 44 years in this organization, I've been associated with these three sectors of what we know as the strategic sectors of India for nearly this longer period. And of course, in case of Larsen Toubro, the nuclear and the space sector journey for L&T began little before my joining. We are partners to the nuclear world. Let me put that word right from 1961. So it's exactly 6 decades, and every possible aspect of what happened in the nuclear sector in terms of technology development is testimony of what Larsen Toubro did with the scientific minds of this country. These references and the scientific people, the community being very small in India, already generally keep on passing on a good word, and that's what got us into the space. And we started building the space rockets in 1971. The first Indian space launch that took place in 1975 incidentally happened on Larsen Toubro's built rocket. From that point on, we even today continue building the rocket motors, and of course, about nearly, I would say, 50 to 60% of the space launch systems that today launch all over satellites right from Indian soil. Now, this is precisely where Dr. Kalam was during the SLV 3 days, and when Dr. Kalam moved into defense, we moved into defense in 1985. Now, this is a part of a journey of an organization, and of course, from 85, there was enormous amount of focus on trying to do things indigenously, and that matched with our psyche within the organization. That by need, the founders, although they were the Danish two engineers, but they actually had to do everything here and now within this country. Now, given this kind of a psyche, and when we teamed up for with the Defense Research and Development Organization under Dr. Kalam, we used to obviously have enormous amount of interactions with Dr. Kalam those days. And through those interactions, we started participating into any and every defense program of this nation. Suffices to say, today, any known and unknown missile systems that exist in India, some of course very openly talked about and some not so openly talked about, all those has a participation by Larsen Toubro. From weapons, we moved into the engineering equipment, which is like the complete systems which essentially operate any platform like the warships and submarines. We got into submarine building soon, little later into warship building. Then, of course, we kept on enhancing our portfolio in terms of weapons and systems. So, on our own R&D strength, when we talk of innovation and doing technologies in-house, not just within the country, when we talk of that, we essentially, as an entire team of L&T Defense, could build typically somewhere around 300 new products and systems of our own in-house R&D. Now, obviously, what it means in terms of the government's focus, Dr. Kalam, till the time he was purely at the DRDL in Hyderabad, the Defense Research and Development Laboratory, after he moved into Delhi, we know that as the scientific advisor to the defense minister, and that those days it used to be called the Director General of DRDO, the Chief of DRDO in short form. Now, this person obviously then started talking of we need to indigenize the defense. So 1971, there's a statement by Kalam that we used to be a country which used to import 70% of our defense wares from overseas, and only 30% used to happen in the country. Obviously, this is a situation that led us, and not enough being done in terms of defense research and indigenous product building. With this background came the Kargil War in 1988-89, and the Kargil War taught enormous lessons to India. The first major lesson at that point in time is we were too complacent as a nation. Of course, the national leadership didn't pay any serious attention. And at that point in time, 98 onwards, when we did our underground explosions and a clear focus came in, that anything and everything that used to be done in defense used to be only open to the government owned companies, and no private company could get into defense. Notwithstanding, there were L&T and Tatas who were associated with defense research then for nearly 1.5 to 17, 18 years. So this opening of the sector happened in 2002, 2001, 2002. It started getting licensed, and what we see in the private sector happening very enormously different today is all that has happened in this country in last 19 years. Now, the history aspect is sometimes important for a reason that there was enormous amount of work that used to happen on the technology development and the R&D side. But all the R&D and technology developed by private sector along with defense research used to go to the government-owned companies, and the government-owned companies would not do as much into trying to make them happen on ground, and as a result, our import dependence used to continue. If I fast forward, although the licenses started being given, fast forward it to 2012-13 till the time we have a recent change in government when Prime Minister Modi formed a government in 2014, we continued to be similar in terms of import content. We used to be typically 70% buyers, and over the years we became number one importer in the world. Our defense sector has always been growing in terms of acquisition that we do from for the armed forces. Now, the entire acquisition those days used to be about 70, 80,000 crore per year. And imagine the entire 70, 80,000 crore of new equipment purchase. 70% used to go out of the country. Now, from this point on, the government decided that we are going to make a change. It's not great to have a dubious kind of being known to be the largest importer in the world. And on the flip side, we had the highest amount of technological manpower, the brain power which is available within this country. And with the kind of engineers and the institutions like the IITs you all belong to, with all that in the backdrop, it was a pity that we used to be an importer. Now, it needed some serious policy changes, which the Modi government started doing from 2014. Now, what has been achieved over the last 7 years, if I just about touch upon, from 30% indigenous content in last 7 years, we actually are today roughly 62% indigenous content. So it's more than doubled. Over next 5 years, we see this 62% going to be becoming to about 80% being done within the country. The future acquisition that used to happen within the country is 82% today under a category which is reserved only for Indian companies to participate. I mean, you can imagine today 1.35 lakh crores of hard equipment, which is what is bought by the defense sector. And when we talk of 1.35 lakh crores of purchases, every year that money government distributes in the form of the bills which companies would make with the government of India. This 135 crores of a size of an economy, actually, if more and more starts happening within the country, and today, as I say, about 62% happens within the country. So nearly about 70 to 80,000 crores of rupees of economy it creates right within this nation. And we know in economics there's a concept of economic value addition to a nation. If I have a contract, let's say from Government of India, and I decide to then give it to my tier one companies and then to the tier twos and tier threes, and then the individual service providers. Typically, in India, we know the multiplier is anywhere between 6 to 8. So if Government of India spends, let's say, 1 rupee, in terms of GDP creation, that 1 rupee means typically between 6 to 8 rupees. And that's a huge contribution and the huge change which has come in over the last 7 years. Now, to facilitate this, every known policy in defense has changed. So the focus came in about defense modernization. The scenario we were in 2013-14 was we couldn't have sustained war at any one sector. Today we are prepared for a war at not just two, but two and a half sectors. And that half is important because Afghanistan became a rogue just about a couple of months back. Now you have that Afghanistan border just across the POK. And the POK then becomes a very, very sensitive zone in addition to the Pakistan and the China on the other side. And of course, this is precisely what has been going on in the Ministry of Defense last couple of years. That every policy they have been talking to industry as well as the bureaucrats and the armed forces, and through that sort of a unison is where all the future decision making started happening. So Government of India decided, and Jan Rawat, who unfortunately is no more today, but Jan Rawat actually took the lead to start saying that if there's something I'm going to need in 2024, why don't I tell you today? And if I tell you today, all of you as great minds within this industry and the country actually can build products for me for 2024. Most of the time what used to happen earlier era is the armed forces need it now, and when they need it now they can't wait till tomorrow, and of course then things used to get imported. So this is what he started calling as the negative list of import. What it means is these items, the complete weapon systems, complete platforms, complete systems and building blocks, you cannot now import. Prime Minister Modi, when he heard of this scheme, he says, but why are you calling it negative list? Negative has a negative connotation. Let's make it positive indigenization list and reinforce that what our industry can do in a given time frame. Let the industry suggest what all we can achieve in XYZ kind of a time frame. And that should be accommodated in the positive list of indigenization. So there's a second list of positive indigenization which the government issued recently. Both lists together are 209 types of equipment systems platforms. When I call a platform, read a full-fledged warship becomes a platform. For a warship, you typically would buy a few tens of thousands of equipment and system. Now, all those, if you are trying to do more than 50 to 60% within the country, that's the policy that today says you will. And of course, there's more and more going to be in the form of incentivization if you do more and more indigenous content. Now, most of people like Larsen Toubro who've been having this R&D for 35 years, in many of our equipment that we physically today supply to the armed forces, we are 95, 98% indigenous. There are few, we obviously do 100% indigenous. There are few, there's hardly anything that comes to my mind, which we do less than about 70 to 80% indigenous content. Now, this is where the dynamics completely changes. And what you guys start realizing as young students is there's an importance of what we can do as our own human minds, our own ability to think, our own ability to innovate, our own ability to find better solutions, more efficient ones. But everything effectively needs a policy. And that policy aspect obviously has to be facilitated from the government side. And this is precisely where, during my profile, what Gautam talked about, the Society of Indian Defence Manufacturers was created. The Ministry of Defence asked all of us as majors in the industry that the industry is quite limited. The few hundred people, of course, in terms of small industries, if we look at the MSMEs, today there's about 8,000 MSMEs who are associated with defence sector. This number, just about 7-8 years back, would not even be one half of that. So there's industry who is jumping in, and they are now into the tierized structure with the major companies, which obviously are the government-owned companies who stay as the major corporations, and then companies like Larsen Tubro, Tatas, Mahindras, they're all in defense. Now, it is that structure which needs to be enabled through a policy change which the government will want to make. When we start talking of policy change, you may make policies, but acquisition may not happen. So acquisition has to be pushed from the government in the form of now creating actual availability of funds and what government can allocate, and of course, ease of doing business. Now, all this today we see concurrently happening. When some of you who obviously are in the last year are going to be stepping out so very soon, if we simply look at where is that government's today agenda in terms of what we physically will create in terms of indigenous GDP. All of you obviously would have read and would have heard that India today is the best performing global economy. And this best performing global economy, when we look at, if I simply start talking of numbers, we used to have a real growth. I'm not talking of inflationary growth. Inflationary growth having been removed, the real growth in the GDP used to be about 7% in 2018. Obviously, over next 2 years, because of the enormous amount of forward-looking decisions which the government made in terms of curtailing the black or the parallel economy, as it is called, the GDP dropped to 4%, 4.2, and then of course as COVID came in, last year it was minus 7.7. This year and the next year is supposed to be 11 to 12% growth. And when we look at 11 to 12% growth plus inflation, you can imagine every year the economy for next 2 years will grow at 15 to 16%. And that's a huge opportunity. So you can look at 15% as a CAGR if we are looking at this year's 100 suddenly means within 2 years a number which is 1.3 times, 1.4 times. Now, this is where a huge amount of opportunities which are being thrown up. Once the GDP grows, there's a linkage of the defense quantum of money to the GDP. Government of India spends about 1/7 to 1/8 of entire government of India's budget on defense. So if there's a GDP of 100 crores, let's say today, we know it's about 200 billion. And from that 200 lakh, sorry, not 200 billion, to 200 lakh crores, from that 200 lakh crores, if we take the just a basic government of India budget, of that budget, typically 1/7 to 1/8 would be spent on defense. So it's somewhere close to about little less than 5 lakh crore government spends on defense, maintaining the armed forces, maintaining a posture with respect to the government, and of that, that 1.35 lakh crores is for the hard modernization where equipment physically gets bought. Now, the more and more, the ones who are serious in the sector then start looking at what is that essentially government will buy, and that's essentially where the business starts getting in beside just an R&D and D and the policy and the availability of money. That opportunity exists, but what, which equipment? Now the one who is able to predict it far better, you have to obviously then know what each of those armed forces are physically going to be needing, and some of us obviously are able to do it quite well. And in this way, the future requirements are in form of new equipment, but also an existing set of equipment which is in service. We're not a very rich country as yet, although we are getting richer by the day. So we also start looking at some of our old systems can be modernized and make them as good. Now, this is essentially where a huge amount of our existing hardware, physically with all the three armed forces, are getting modernized. On one side, we are building right in the state of Gujarat a battle tank and a battle tank mounted artillery guns which can pound enemy with a 47 kilo shell at 42-43 kilometers of a range. Now, when you pound it, you can pound it six rounds in first minute of getting into operation. So it has a huge shock. You can imagine 300 kilos of explosives being put onto somebody's head right within the first minute of coming into operation. That's about the new systems that you can build with enormous capabilities. On the other side, you also have the older rocket launching systems within the Indian Army, and those old systems, which possibly were acquired sometime in the 80s and the 90s, needed now a modernization because we know any electronics that they existed, or instead of electronics, a lot of mechanical equipment that was getting used those days requires typically 1 hour before a weapon system can get effectively launchable. So you take it to a location, set it up, check where the north is, because on a one point in the grid on the map, you want to fire on an enemy at another point in the grid, you need to know where exactly to fire and what kind of changes in terms of bearing and the elevation that you need to be making before firing. Now, if that is precise, you get a pinpoint firing. Now, to get pinpoint accuracy, today enormous amount of electronics is happening, and that's essentially where huge amount of embedded software and bulk of our systems today. Earlier era was more of mechanical stuff. The new era we start seeing where your mechanical equipment does X amount of work. The knowledge which is built into every possible change which you want to do to get the pinpoint accuracy, it's not unthinkable today to say that I will fire at few tens or few hundreds of kilometers and will have a point of fall of my weapon or the warhead within single digit radius of where the target is. Can imagine we are talking of angles in terms of better than arc minutes and arc seconds. Now, those accuracies will not be possible because atmosphere, as we look at, the space is not one single medium. As we keep climbing, the space gets layered, and anything that moves with a very high velocity, like we see the light when it enters the Earth's atmosphere, we know there's refraction. So early morning, when you start seeing the sun later, but you start seeing the light first. And that's essentially where the refraction of light does take place when it's going to denser and denser layers. Opposite happens when you have a very fast moving weapon. Now, sheer on the technology side, when you're trying to fire at a location, you pass through those many layers and then you come down when you're firing at long distance. And you need to be predicting both on the upside as well as the downside travel, the precise quantum of what is going to be happening on the refraction, and then be able to precisely predict where you will be able to shoot with best accuracy. Now, this is all science, this is all mathematics, this is what all algorithms are all about. So, when we talk of modernization, we don't talk of modernization of just taking out one piece of machine and trying to replace with another machine. How do we build in much more level of intelligence into the whole equipment or the whole new weapon system it starts becoming? And this is precisely the game that constantly keeps getting played between the target and, of course, the one who is engaging a target. Now, to know where enemy is, you require a huge amount of intelligence gathering. So that's where it starts right from the satellite up in the sky, who is able to tell you where the enemy is today, right now at this instant. And that right now at this instant live becomes extremely important Then comes obviously the UAVs, the aircrafts that can fly, provide you precise information about the enemy locations. And beyond that, of course, are various other ways in terms of radars and high altitude radars, which you certainly can utilize. Also, the AVAX kind of system, which not only is useful for the air to air kind of battle, but also is able to see what precisely there on ground. Now, when information is available through multiple ways and forms, there's an enormous amount of information gathering and providing one single picture of the focused area at which the war is likely to be taking place, and then be in a position to provide that information to every possible soldier group. Technology today is enormously moving on into the reaching this information very quickly processed so that it's available, and that's all nothing but communication. So there's huge amount of embedded knowledge, huge amount of software development through algorithm route, and of course on the other end, how to reach it very, very quickly to the person who needs it so that at that given point in time, within couple of seconds, if you are able to engage an enemy, you get a dramatically different effect. And then you don't need tons and tons of explosives, you need very small quantum because you're going to do a precision strike. So today the war is becoming precision. A lot of war in the past used to physically involve people. You still need people because after you have conquered, you need to be holding ground. And this is what India has done in every of the war. For political reasons, whatever we had actually conquered on the enemy side, we vacated and came back. But the fact remains, to hold ground, you need people. But before you today send people, you don't want them to be in the harm's way. So today it's becoming very, very largely software driven, very, very largely unmanned. So comes the unmanned sector. Unmanned sector, if we look at today, war is looking at how the armored army and let's say armed forces preparation today is moving very dramatically into unmanned systems. So you have unmanned full-fledged aircraft, loitering weapons. So aircraft is flying, it remains there for let's say 24 hours, and it waits and decides which is the right time to strike because it's able to see ground below, and at a right point in time you can make an attack. You also have ground segment where the ground vehicles can run without man. So if you're seeing you're getting into danger, why put a man in it? The tank can still move on and tank can fire. You can be in a safe location and still guide the tank how exactly it will go. Same thing is today happening on the sea in terms of warships, the unmanned vessels. Unmanned vessels is a technology which all of us today are building into the country. And as lesson to grow, the fourth dimension for us that becomes important, being the submarine builders to the nation now for 3.5 decades, we also do the same unmanned systems in underwater vessels. Now, the beauty of underwater is it's never visible. Enemy can't see it easily. And that's essentially where below water, if you're moving something, there's just absolute chance that you might get 100% precise hit. Now, this is where obviously the unmanned sector is coming in. Along with the unmanned, the communication keeps getting to the base, and the base really then can decide with a man in the loop which is more dangerous, which is what we need to be doing. So, when we start looking at the whole of, let's say, the war engagement, it's not really to get into war. It's really to get in, build that kind of a speed, decision making happening in split seconds. And if you're more prepared, you're assured absolutely ever, forever that nobody else will want to come and engage you. Because if he engages, he knows you're stronger than me. I think the whole concept of war is not to physically fight, to raise your readiness and to raise your capability so much that because of that capability, somebody would not want to come in the harm and do any harm to a nation. So today, essentially, bulk of what is happening on the modernization becomes a very broad-based term, but a lot of work is truly happening. And most of what I said in terms of the class and kind of system, they are all now being done indigenously. Huge opportunity for people who today will enter the sector. Let me tell you, when your Amalthea started in 2010, the first of the batches wouldn't have had those opportunities. So the world is opening, the industry is opening, the economy is dramatically growing, provides huge amount of opportunities. All of us, I believe, and being myself an IITian, we believe what we pay as fees is not something that the government of India actually incurs on your education. Be conscious, when I was in IIT, the fee that I used to pay was 480 rupees a year for my tuition fees. Now 480 rupees a year in 70s was a big money, but even that money was a fraction. And today, whatever you pay, a little more than a lakh of rupees per year, is a fraction of what the government incurs on all of our education. And when somebody else is paying for your education, it is that somebody who needs to be genuinely given something in return. People like me who stayed within the country, obviously great opportunities always existed outside, but we built an entire set of capabilities for the nation, a full-fledged sector. I just talked today about part of what we did in defense. We didn't get into any details of what everything that L&T does, but the fact remains that all of us could have had those great opportunities. Now, this is precisely where you have to start believing that if there's somebody who's done it for me, then I need to do it for him at a later date. And that's a kind of a gratitude with which we can serve this country. All of us who lived in, nearly for me, 45th year of my career just about to begin, we still see this country to be deserving far more than all of us as the best brains in this nation actually want to give it in return. And it deserves more. It deserves more. At Lasan Bro, you notice, if you can see here, there's a flag of India we always carry on our heart. You will see many senior L&T executives actually carrying this flag. So there's a logo of Lasan Bro below and there's a flag above. All of us mean when we say doing it for the nation. It's that patriotism and not for any other reason. If you were not a patriot, at least be able to say or be able to serve someone who served you when you were in need. I think my time is nearly about half an hour over. I'll stop with that just by saying your motherland is as much your mother as you look after your mother later. And obviously, till the days you have got into the kind of best of the institutions today, somebody looked after you, your parents, but beyond parents, there's a hidden hand, unseen hand. That unseen hand needs your hand as well. I think that's what we can do for our own country, our own nation. Jai Hind. Gautam, I can't hear you. You're probably muted.
Hello.
Yes.
Am
Now,
I all right? So I was saying that, sir, it was a very, very inspiring speech, and I absolutely am sure that the audience felt as inspired as I did, and everything that you said made so much sense to all of us. Thanks a lot for your time, and I would just like to raise a few questions that the audience members had, and if you could maybe answer them, that would be great.
sure.
So we've got one of the questions coming up from the audience, which says that as the president of the Society of Indian Defense Manufacturers, a society that was built with an aim to produce indigenous defense equipment, which areas within the defense sectors do you target to indigenize?
I must say there's no area which our armed forces need, we are excluding. Must also
Hmm.
say that as far as today's position is concerned, and I don't get into the past, but today's position is concerned, anything that the Navy or the land forces, that's the Army needs, the country has full capability to design and build anything within here. That reflects in that what I said, 82% of future acquisition. Let me just put a number to it. there's little more than 5.5 lakh crores of programs government has cleared for acquisition over next 4 to 5 years. 82% of it is going to be indigenous based on indigenous capability. Wherever we don't have a full capability with us, we have a choice. Maybe half of it we can do on our own. For something, if somebody needs a small little capability, one particular technology which a company doesn't have, he can tie up only for that with a foreigner. So the scenario is dramatically changing,
Correct.
and of course, there is no sector which is avoided. Only sector which today still needs a good amount of foreign dependence is the air air sector, the fighters, the helicopters. Helicopters today, to a large extent, still Hindustan Aeronautics is doing. They started design and build typically about 10 years back, but there's a lot much more to be done. Whereas when it comes to warships and submarines, trust me, today there's virtually nothing that gets imported. You can hear during the warship commissioning, it's 96% bought in India. It's not unthinkable today. And of course, as of date, the Navy and the Coast Guard is nearly little more than 300 warship kind of a fleet. Of that 300 warship fleet, we today have very dramatic indigenous content. Larsen Toubro's equipment itself exists out of the naval 140 on 110 ships, and in case of Coast Guard, 35% of Coast Guard fleet is designed and built by L&T. We just have delivered a 67th war vessel. That's what on the surface ship side. So there's a lot which is happening here, and of course there's no sector which is excluded. The absolute top end, pure electronic warfare kind of a system, to the communication systems I talked of, command control systems, the weapon systems, the platforms, everything is happening here.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot for that. So we've got another question by Lipika, which says that, sir, if you could please give us an insight into the investment that goes behind developing technologies and infrastructure for programs like the P75 submarines.
P75 submarine is something which government of India has decided that we will build here because of some new element which is called the air independent propulsion. When you build a submarine, you realize that human beings are inside a sealed steel tank,
Hmm.
whatever shape. It's the steel which carries an external pressure equivalent of 300 to 400 tons in 1 square meter. The the 1 meter square, which is typically the surface of a human body, will carry 300 to 400 tons of load. Now, inside, of course, as a result, you need oxygen for the human beings. Now, where do you carry oxygen? You can store it. There's a limitation to how much you can store and carry. And as a result, conventional submarines need to keep surfacing, and they cannot use your diesel engines for the purpose of power generation when they are dived. So when they surface,
Yeah.
suck the atmospheric air, store the air for crew, basically the human consumption, and while on surface, it consumes air also with the diesel, charges batteries, thereafter dives and keeps operating. Now, the difference of 75 and 75 India, the two programs, since Deepika seems to know 75 India, is that in one, you use this diesel engine at surface, charge your batteries, in the other, you generate electricity through fuel cells in dived condition. Now, Larsen Toubro and Defense Research have built indigenous air independent propulsion system that fuel cell based. So you generate hydrogen in place inside a submarine and use that hydrogen for the purpose of generation of power in a fuel cell. And that's essentially where it differentiates in terms of anything else. Now, obviously, our own technology exists in the country, but our technology is not as matured to physically get into a submarine, and that's essentially where we are collaborating with somebody outside this country. There are a couple of countries who seem to have done it little before us. And these one or two or three countries is where there is a collaboration only for that aspect. Rest, of course, we know how to do it. So basic design of a submarine, India never did because submarines were not open to the private sector. Strategic submarine is a different cup of tea. The strategic sector is submarines, obviously, are nuclear powered, and as a result, I'm not discussing anything on that aspect. That something is where it's known that India has a complete capability from the basic design to building, but the large numbers are the conventional submarines in use, and they require this technology. That is essentially where large sums, thousands of crores get in. If you're doing an industrial scale kind of or the submarine scale kind of a power generation plant using fuel cells. Now we have our own program which typically has costed defense research somewhere around about 1,500 crores. And that's where some of these technologies is where the government and the private sector, or let's say the industrial sector, whether private or public, actually have to work together. At the same time, there are technologies which are beyond that, elemental technologies, industry can on its own develop. It's not unusual to find that of your earnings, let's say in L&T defense, I can say what we earn of that typically uh, about 12 to 14% goes in R&D. We maintain one of the largest R&Ds in this country, which second only to what defense research does. And that's essentially where you pump in money because you know if I pump in money, I'm going to be obviously be getting other bigger opportunities which will pay for it. Of course, you're paying much before ever seeing the money being realized, but that's exactly the game. And one decides how exactly to take those kind of strategic decisions into future. What you do today in defense, you will get the revenues typically 10 years later.
All right, sir. That's a wonderful answer. So there's one more question by Rajen Biswa, and Rajen has a question that how are you doing border surveillance and monitoring, and what space applications are being used for this?
In case of border surveillance, of course, today I can't say that everything is physically in use. We have enormous amount of border fencing which has been done. And if any one of you have flown out, especially from Delhi westwards, night time you see beautiful, very well lit border of India. Between Pakistan and India, there's a full-fledged border which is properly demarked. There's a proper fencing with proper lighting. But obviously, having just a physical barrier, uh, like you to your own bungalow, you decide to have, let's say, a fence, doesn't help. So today it is moving into multiple sectors of sensors. You want to know whether on the other side of the border somebody is walking. It's an animal walking or a human being walking. So you are able to sense right from the ground vibrations to physically, let's say, uh, ability to get a low light video to a full pitch night with a night vision devices. Uh, you can see what is happening. Uh, in case of atmosphere being not very clean and let's say there's a lot of fog, we know the EO devices don't work, and when the electro optics or the IR doesn't work, you actually use radars for that. And there are radars of that short range, about 8 kilometers, 10 kilometers, who are precisely able to see a human being walking or an animal walking. So today it's a combination of all this. Space thing is technically all feasible, but we don't have those many space satellites, space-based assets today to be able to monitor borders. They're used for different purposes today. Not as many exist for the purpose of sort of targeting a specific kind of a border. But some day later, because the space-based surveillance becoming part of defense has been just a decision of about 3 years back. They created a specific space directorate. And of course, couple of years down, we probably will see many more military satellites capable of seeing things. Today, the satellites, especially the military satellites, are able to see a resolution of 10 centimeters. So, if there's a human being, certainly he'll be identified. A small little rat, technically, can be identified.
Yes, sir. So we'll take one last question, and that is by this question is by Heiko. He says that what sort of challenges did you primarily face during the completion of the Canine Vajra program, especially since it involved a huge percentage of indigenous work?
Vajra was, I must tell you, Vajra was in a category which Vajra program started during the previous regime of the government. 2011 is when Vajra was tendered out. And as per that day's norm, and that's exactly the difference between the two governments, they had put it in a category called Buy Global. Now, what Buy Global means is it's open for anybody else in the world. And anybody across the world can feel free and bid for it. So you have a global competition. Uh, at that point in time, Larsen Toubro decided that we are going to bid for the program. Now we didn't have uh, every technology associated, so we decided to team up with someone who's built 1,500 such guns, and the only company in the world who had done that was a Korean company, because Korea, between north and south, have enormous amount of issues. It's far, far hotter. It's actually something like sitting in Kashmir and a POK being on the other side. And with that kind of a scenario, we decided to build, and we saw this system which the Koreans had, and we could very quickly identify that 17 major systems of this Korean gun system needed a complete replacement if they had to be physically passing the kind of trials which Indian Army would do. Now that's essentially where an enormously good knowledge of what Indian Army actually needs. And we decided to make this 17 systems. So we ripped off this existing tank-based gun of 17 major systems. So what remained is the basic gun remained unchanged, the engine and transmission remained unchanged. A lot of equipment was designed and built in India. Over exactly 14-15 months, we accomplished that, integrated a first system, and that first system actually saw all trials. And historically, right from 1970s, there's any program which met 100% of Army's acceptance and 100% ticks, call it 100 or 100 out of 100 marks, was a scenario for Vajra. Having done that, then we said these 17 systems now I need to make, but also I want to make what all you are today doing except the gun, engine, and transmission. I can't design and build an engine for 100 numbers. The program at that point in time was 100 numbers, so we said engine we will buy, the automatic transmission we will buy, gun we will buy, everything else we will build here. So Vajra actually saw an 82% indigenization. Now, what 82% indigenization needed was 1,100 industry partners. So we built a supply chain of very, very trustable partners, and that's was a huge challenge. To do it within 42 months is unthinkable anywhere else in the world. Nobody has achieved it. Forget about in Indian public sector kind of a parlance, and we delivered all 100 ahead of schedule. So this supply chain, and that's essentially where when you have very, very trustable partners in the industry, and that, as we said, there's a tierization. Now, all these tierized partners, if one decides to fail you, you can't deliver a tank. Now, that's where it's a symphony of those 1,100 simultaneously sort of putting their music together. Then it becomes music, otherwise, it becomes noise. Now, Vajra was a huge challenge, but a huge success as a result, and that built the kind of mindset within the Ministry of Defense and any and everybody in the armed forces that most impossible can actually be done in India. So it's a benchmark designed for the western border in terms of pure desert scenario, 50 plus degrees centigrade outside. Vajra works. So is Vajra is today working at minus 20, minus 30. Vajra today exists not only on the western border, it is also on the northern border, and it works. works at that high altitude, and it works far better in terms of range. Firing ranges you get far better. So obviously challenges are always there, and essentially that's where my way of communication to my entire team is: if there are no challenges, engineers won't be employed. So all of you guys are going to be employed because there's somebody who is going to have a challenge. If there's no challenge, a worker would do the job. We are not needed. You're muted, Gautam. I can't.
Just a
Yeah,
second.
now I can hear you.
Okay, okay. Is it audible now?
Yes,
All right, sir. Sorry for the for the slight network issues. But yes, so that was a great way to put it. That at the end of the day, we're all nothing but problem solvers. And by that, I would just want to sort of conclude this session. And if you have any last words that you would want to share with all of us.
I said the last word earlier. Do something for your nation.
Fantastic, sir. So thank you so much for giving us your time. We really, really thoroughly enjoyed this session, and we're all greatly inspired by all the work that you and L&T has done for the country. And thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, and wish you all the best. Next 2 days, you're going to be having more and more of, let me say, churning of your minds. Anything that you churn,
Yes, sir.
nice butter comes out of it, right? So whether it's milk, whether it's
Yes, sir.
call it dahi, you churn it and something nice comes out. So obviously, put your thinking caps on. Try and utilize that butter in a very very nice way in terms of your mind having been churned.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Definitely.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me for this talk. Hope.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right.
Thank you so much, sir.
Bye. Bye.
Bye, sir.
Bye.